For 30 long years, Margaret Wensley scrubbed the floors of St Albans Primary School in Manchester. Come rain or snow, she arrived before dawn, her hands cracked from bleach and hard water, her knees worn from a lifetime of kneeling. She never minded. Each mop stroke, every rubbish bin emptied, was for her boy, Oliver. After her husband died when Oliver was just a toddler, Margaret promised herself she'd give him a life better than hers. She never remarried, never spent a penny she didn't need. Instead, she stashed her savings into a weathered envelope tucked beneath the floorboards of her bedroom. Pound by pound, her dream took shape. One day, she would buy Oliver a house. Margaret never told him. She didn't need praise. She only wanted to see his smile, to hear him say, "Thanks, Mum," maybe for the first time in years. Now, Oliver was all grown up, a marketing executive in London with a fiancée from a well-to-do family. They were planning a grand wedding in the Yorkshire Dales, the kind with string quartets and flower arches. Margaret couldn't have been prouder, even if her invitation had arrived 2 weeks late. She had already picked a modest blue dress from the charity shop and saved up for a train ticket. Then came the swelling in her leg. At first, she thought it was nothing, a cramp, perhaps. But it turned angry red, hot to the touch. By the time she arrived at the hospital in Leeds, the infection had spread. The doctor admitted her immediately. Wedding plans faded into the sterile walls of her hospital room. On the day she was meant to board the train, she lay in bed with an 4 in her arm and a heavy heart in her chest. "I'm sorry, love," she whispered to the photo of Oliver she kept by her bedside. "I tried." But fate had one more twist waiting for her. Just down the corridor, voices drifted past her door. One of them, too familiar to mistake. It was Oliver. He was speaking to her doctor. Margaret froze, barely breathing. "What are we looking at?" Oliver asked, his tone brisk. "Will she walk again?" The doctor hesitated. "It depends. We're doing our best. But at her age, and given the severity, there's a chance we may have to consider amputation." Margaret's blood ran cold. Then Oliver said something she would never forget. "I mean, I'm not trying to be cruel," he said, lowering his voice, "but she's just a cleaner. She wouldn't even fit in at the wedding. You should see how my fiancé reacts when I talk about her. Honestly, it's better she's not coming." Margaret shut her eyes. The pain in her leg was nothing compared to the one now throbbing in her chest. Her son. Her pride. Her purpose. And he had called her, just a cleaner. She clutched the photograph tighter. And in that moment, something changed. She would not let this be her ending. Not yet. Margaret stared at the ceiling of her hospital room, the dim white lights casting a cold hue on the linoleum floor. The doctor came in later that afternoon with a clipboard and a polite smile. But she barely heard a word he said. Her mind was elsewhere. For 30 years, she had believed love meant sacrifice. That giving everything for someone you loved, without expecting anything in return, was noble. And perhaps it still was. But now, she began to wonder if she had given too much. She turned her head to the window, the drizzle tracing soft trails down the glass. Somewhere out there, her son was preparing to walk down the aisle. He would wear his sharp suit, smile for the cameras, laugh with in-laws who looked down their noses at women like her. And he would tell everyone that his mother was too unwell to come. He would never tell them that he was relieved. That he was ashamed of her. That he thought she was just a cleaner. A nurse entered with painkillers, but Margaret waved her off. She had made a decision. The next morning, Margaret asked for her phone and called her neighbor, Elaine, a kind widow who had always looked after her garden when she was away. "Elaine, love," Margaret said softly. "Do you still have that spare key to my flat?" "I do, dear," Elaine replied. "Why?" "There's an envelope under the floorboard beneath my bed. Could you bring it to me?" Anne. I'll need you to help me find a driver. A driver? Margaret, you should be resting. I'll rest later, Margaret said. Right now, I've got a wedding to attend. 2 days later, under grey skies and a chill wind, a black car pulled up to the grand country manor where Oliver's wedding was underway. The gravel crunched beneath Margaret's sensible shoes as she stepped out, one hand gripping her cane, the other clutching a plain brown envelope. Guests turned to look as she slowly made her way past the flower arrangements and silk-draped chairs. They did not recognize her. Not at first. She didn't look like the photos Oliver had shown them. Those photos were old, from when she still dyed her hair and smiled more often. She was thinner now. Paler. But her eyes burned with quiet fire. Inside the hall, a string quartet played Vivaldi as champagne flowed and laughter echoed. Margaret stood at the edge of the room. She didn't make a scene. She didn't shout. She simply waited. And then, Oliver saw her. His face blanched. He made his way across the room, adjusting his cufflinks nervously. "Mum," he said, too quietly for anyone else to hear. "What are you doing here?" Margaret smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I wanted to deliver your wedding present in person." She held out the envelope. Oliver hesitated, then took it. He opened it slowly, revealing a thick sheaf of property papers, all neatly signed. A house. In Manchester. Bought in full. For you, Margaret said calmly. I've been saving since you were 7. Oliver looked down at the papers, then back up at her. He didn't speak. Behind him, his bride approached, a glass of Prosecco in hand. "And who is this?" she asked, giving Margaret a once-over. "This," Margaret said, still looking at Oliver, "is the woman your husband thought wasn't good enough to attend." She turned, cane tapping sharply against the floor, and walked away. She didn't need to stay. She had delivered her message. And this time, she wasn't the one left behind. Oliver stood frozen with the envelope in his hands, his jaw clenched and eyes flickering toward the doorway his mother had just exited through. The murmurs had already begun. Whispers rippled across the crowd like a sudden breeze. A few guests eyed him with curiosity. Others, with thinly veiled judgment. "Was that your mother?" asked his bride, her voice a tight whisper, more alarmed than curious. "Yes," he muttered, folding the envelope and slipping it into his inner pocket. "She wasn't supposed to be here." The bride scoffed, swirling her drink. "Well, she's made quite an entrance. Everyone's talking." Oliver didn't reply. He turned away, making his way through the crowd, ignoring the champagne flutes and well-meaning guests offering him hors d'oeuvres. He needed air. Outside, the clouds had broken slightly, casting slivers of gold on the damp garden path. Margaret was gone. The car had already pulled away. He sighed and pulled out his phone, opening the texts from the past week. One from Margaret. "Happy to see you off, darling. I've been saving something special." He hadn't replied. Another, from 3 days ago. "Doctor says it's only mild infection. Don't worry about me. Focus on the wedding." He had read it and deleted it. Oliver sat on a bench beneath a cherry tree in partial bloom and put his face in his hands. He hadn't wanted her there. That was true. But he didn't expect her to come at all, much less with that. A house. Paid in full. It didn't make sense. She lived modestly. Always had. Wore the same coat for years, never had takeout, and always used the same battered handbag with a broken zip. He thought it was because she didn't care about money. Now, he realized it was because she had been saving every penny. For him. He stared at the gravel path, his mind replaying the way she'd said it. "I've been saving since you were 7. 7. That was the year his dad left. He remembered it vaguely, coming home from school, Margaret's eyes red from crying, her smile forced. From that day on, she worked longer shifts. Never complained. Said everything was fine. Said he was her whole world. A sick weight sank in his stomach. Had he ever said thank you? Back in the wedding hall, the atmosphere had shifted. Guests were polite, but something in the air had changed. Like they had seen something raw and unpolished peek through the glittering curtain. In the bridal suite, the bride and her mother stood over a table covered with gifts and cards. "Well," the bride's mother said, looking down at the envelope. "I must say, for a cleaner, she certainly knows how to make a statement." The bride said nothing. The door creaked open. Oliver stepped in. "She's not just a cleaner," he said quietly. The two women looked up. "She's the reason I'm standing here today. The reason I didn't grow up in a shelter. The reason I had shoes on my feet every school term. And that house. She didn't buy that to impress you. She bought it because she's loved me more than I ever deserved." His voice cracked slightly. "And I told her she wasn't welcome." There was a long silence. Then, without another word, Oliver turned and walked out again, this time not for air, but for answers. The black cab slowed along a quiet lane flanked by dry stone walls and blooming hedges. It was far from the bustle of Manchester, nestled on the edge of a modest village with a crooked little post office and a red phone box that hadn't rung in years. Oliver stepped out, his dress shoes crunching on gravel. He looked around at the modest row of cottages, quaint, uniform, and aged by time. No luxury. No grandeur. Just simple, lived-in charm. He stopped in front of number 14. Margaret's house. The door was painted pale blue. Slightly chipped. A hanging basket of dried petunias swung gently in the breeze. He didn't knock immediately. His fingers hesitated above the wood. Then, tap, tap, tap. Moments later, the door creaked open. Margaret stood in the doorway, no longer in her smart coat and scarf, but in a faded jumper and house slippers. Her eyes were tired, and she held a mug of tea with both hands as if it were the only thing keeping her steady. "You've come." Oliver swallowed hard. "I have." There was a pause before she stepped aside. "Come in then. Tea's just brewed." He entered slowly, taking in the small, cozy front room. A threadbare rug, old family photos on the walls, and a fireplace that looked like it hadn't been lit in months. The air smelled faintly of lavender and toast. "I wasn't sure if you'd come after all that." Margaret poured the tea, her hands trembling slightly. "I didn't know," Oliver said quietly. "About the house. The savings. Everything." "No," she said softly. "You wouldn't have. I didn't want you growing up feeling like you owed me something." He looked at her, really looked this time. The soft lines around her eyes. The way her shoulders stooped from years of work. The deep, quiet strength in her that he'd mistaken for meekness. "You could have spent it on yourself. Holidays. Better things." She chuckled faintly, settling into the chair opposite. "What for? I had you. That was enough." Oliver's voice broke. "I told you not to come to my wedding." "Yes," she nodded. "You did." A silence fell between them, only interrupted by the soft clink of her teaspoon. "I was ashamed," he whispered. Margaret didn't react immediately. "Of me?" she asked, with no bitterness, just a mother's soft honesty. He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "You worked hard so I wouldn't have to live the way you did," he said. "And somewhere along the way, I started believing I was better than you." She didn't scold. She didn't cry. Instead, she reached across the small table and took his hand. "You're not better than me, love. And I'm not better than you. We're just part of each other." His eyes welled up. Mum. I'm so sorry. Margaret squeezed his fingers gently. It's not too late, Ollie. You've still got time to remember where you came from. A knock interrupted them. It was the postman, delivering a registered letter. Margaret took it, her expression puzzled. Odd. I wasn't expecting anything. She opened it and her eyes scanned the page. Then she passed it to Oliver with a quiet breath. It was a formal legal notice. Margaret had unknowingly been the beneficiary of a client's estate, an elderly man she used to clean for, who had left her something unexpected. Oliver stared at the final line. Property on Primrose Hill, London. Estimated value, £1.6 million. Full ownership transferred to Margaret, the only soul who treated me with dignity. He looked up, stunned. Margaret blinked, utterly confused. I used to tidy his flat once a week. He was lonely. Talked about his dog. Oliver let out a laugh of disbelief. You're joking. She wasn't. Margaret sat back, dazed. And for the first time in decades, Oliver saw his mother not just as a cleaner, but as a woman whose quiet kindness had been noticed, even if only by one. The view from the estate agent's car was almost surreal. As they crested the leafy slope, the elegant curve of Primrose Hill revealed itself, terraced townhouses with tall sash windows, iron-railed steps, and the kind of silence that only belonged to the wealthy. The trees whispered with history. The air itself seemed scented with old money. Margaret sat stiffly in the back seat, her cardigan folded over her lap. She hadn't spoken much since they left the village. Oliver sat beside her, now dressed plainly, not in a suit, just a jumper and jeans, his posture more subdued than ever. When the car finally stopped, the agent turned to them. Number 27. It's been vacant since Mr. Alderton passed, but we've kept it well maintained. Would you like to take a look inside, Mrs. Hargrave? Margaret hesitated. Is it really mine? Yes, madam. The paperwork is all in order. The door creaked open to reveal a hallway of polished parquet flooring and a grand staircase curling like a ribbon toward the first floor. Tall ceilings, cornices, and original fireplaces in every room. It wasn't just a home. It was the kind of property one glimpsed in Sunday magazines but never dared dream of entering. Margaret moved quietly through the rooms, touching surfaces like they might crumble beneath her fingers. Her old hands brushed the edge of the marble mantel. The silence echoed against the plastered walls. Oliver watched her, unsure whether to smile or apologize again. She looked so out of place, yet somehow, utterly right. In the study, they found something unexpected, a framed photo on the desk. It was Margaret. She was younger, maybe 10 years earlier, standing beside Mr. Alderton, smiling awkwardly with a tea tray in hand. Beneath the frame, a note in fine handwriting, the only person who ever asked how my day was. Margaret's breath caught. Her lips parted, but no words came. Oliver placed a hand gently on her shoulder. He saw you, Mum. Even when I didn't. They stood there in silence for a moment that felt suspended in time. Outside, London hummed faintly, as if holding its breath. Later that evening, they sat on the velvet settee in the front room, watching the light change through the tall bay windows. The city stretched far below them, a sea of rooftops and spires. I don't even know what to do with a place like this, Margaret murmured. You live in it, Oliver said simply. You let it remind you that you were never just a cleaner. She looked at him then, her eyes filled not with tears, but with something quieter. Acceptance. Perhaps even peace. But I was, she said gently. And that's what makes this so beautiful. Oliver nodded slowly. In that moment, he no longer saw his mother as someone he needed to hide behind a title or a facade. He saw her fully. And somewhere deep inside, he began to change. The morning of the wedding dawned cool and grey, with the kind of soft drizzle London was famous for. Margaret woke early, her heart a complicated knot of nerves and hope. She dressed carefully in a modest but elegant navy blue dress, one she had kept for special occasions. The pearl necklace, her mother's, rested lightly around her neck, catching the dull morning light. Oliver was busy downstairs, talking quietly with the caterers and florists, trying to make everything perfect. Margaret stood by the window, watching the raindrops race each other down the glass. She wondered if today would finally be the day Oliver would see her as more than a cleaner, more than the woman who had raised him alone. The church was a short walk away, a small, ivy-clad chapel tucked between rows of Georgian townhouses in Kensington. Margaret made her way there slowly, her footsteps muffled by the wet cobblestones. Inside, the pews were filling quickly with guests dressed in their Sunday best. Margaret found a quiet seat near the back, hoping to remain unnoticed. Then, as the organ began to play, a familiar voice echoed through the chapel. "Where's my mother?" Oliver's whisper cut through the murmurs. Margaret's heart sank. She glanced toward the entrance. He wasn't alone. Beside him stood his fiancée, Clara, her face tight with frustration. "She said she wouldn't come," Clara hissed, barely concealing her contempt. Oliver looked conflicted, torn between anger and guilt. Margaret wanted to speak, to explain that she had never meant to stay away. But the words caught in her throat. She sat frozen, watching as the ceremony began without her. Outside, the rain softened to a gentle mist. In that silence, Margaret understood something she hadn't before. Sometimes love isn't loud or proud. Sometimes it's waiting patiently in the shadows, hoping for a chance to be seen. Days passed after the wedding, and the house on Primrose Hill felt emptier than ever. Margaret moved quietly through its grand rooms, the silence pressing on her chest. Then one afternoon, as she was tidying the study, she noticed an envelope tucked behind the photo of herself and Mr. Alderton. The paper was aged but the handwriting unmistakably Oliver's. With trembling hands, she opened the letter. "Dear Mum, I owe you everything. I was blinded by pride and fear, and I treated you unfairly. You have been my rock, my guiding light, and the only person who never gave up on me. I want you to know that no matter what anyone says, you deserve all the happiness in the world. Please forgive me for my mistakes. Come home. Love. Oliver." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly seen. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back on the desk, a small smile breaking across her lips. Outside, the London sky was brightening. Maybe, just maybe, this was a new beginning. Margaret took a deep breath and stepped outside, the fresh London air filling her lungs. The city around her bustled with life, full of endless possibilities. She decided it was time to forgive, to heal, and to rebuild the bridge she and Oliver had once thought burned beyond repair. When she arrived at Oliver's new home in Chelsea, she was greeted not with coldness, but with open arms and tears of relief. Oliver apologized again, his voice thick with emotion. "I was wrong to push you away, Mum. You mean everything to me." Margaret smiled warmly, feeling a peace she had not known for years. Together, they began to plan a future where love and respect would no longer be words left unspoken. Sometimes, the hardest journeys lead to the most beautiful destinations. And for Margaret and Oliver, their journey was just beginning.